We all seem to think that we have all the answers. Ask most of us for advice, and we will know just what to do or say. But when you get down to it, none of us really knows anything. We all have our presumptions and personal experiences that shaped who we are and what we think. But if you take a closer look and analyze the details, our knowledge is constantly evolving, growing, and changing. Keeping this in mind, we can maintain a growth mindset and learn virtually anything. This perspective has allowed Bert Hesse to not just be a successful serial entrepreneur, it has allowed him to jump into completely different industries in the process. Whether starting a software company, creating a niche in healthcare, or bringing whitewater rapids to an urban landscape, Bert has used this mantra in every business venture he has entered. Ultimately settling on film production, Bert Hesse isn't just making movies, he is creating the industry for the Carolinas. Partnering with the largest university in the state, along with some of its most influential people, Bert is once again primed for success in an area that he is still learning and developing. While he will tell you he doesn't know much about technology, making movies, designing software, or ads for Super Bowl commercials, he hasn't let that stop him. What he does know is that combining the right people, talent, and financing means you don't have to. Simply follow your gut, ask a lot of questions, and don't take no for an answer, and you can have all the success you're after, despite not knowing anything. Hear how he was able to do this in part 1 of my recent conversation with Bert Hesse.
Film, if you make a good film, you don't have to come out with, 2.0 of it, and it can continue to make money for people are still making money off movies like It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah, like in perpetuity.
Right. Yeah. But it's got to be good. So there's a lot of aspects of it that I liked.
Cool. And so Tyson's the one that's got the Sonic deal going on, or he's
Mr. Sonic.
I understand he kind of got pulled in because of their having some troubles, right. But what was his thing early on with Sonic that then led to him getting...
He would sit in church with us, Tyson, at 8 years old and be drawing. And he was really a fairly good drawer. But all he would do is draw. That's all he wanted to do is draw. And I'm sitting there looking at this kid going, this guy's going to be a 40-year-old guy living in my basement doing caricatures at the state fair. How can you make a living drawing? And then he got into Sonic. And then it was, how can you make a living drawing Sonic the Hedgehog? So he kept perfecting his craft, went to Savannah School of Art and Design, was done really well there, was offered a lot of opportunities to go to work for some very prestigious companies, Disney, Sony, Pixar, that type of thing.
All as an animator?
Yeah,
or
right. Turned them all down. And I'm like, oh, whoa, what are you doing?
I just jumped right over you. You say turn them all down.
Turn them down. He wanted to do his own thing.
Wow, and that takes some guts.
He didn't necessarily want to be drawing other people's ideas. So he actually came up with some characters in a comic book and a lot of other things, but always stayed with Sonic the Hedgehog as his core skill set. And Sonic, like any animated or even live action figure, sometimes goes through revisions over years. The original Superman that was back in the 50s does not necessarily look like the Superman that's in the comic book today. And so when Paramount started doing this movie, Sonic the Hedgehog, they wanted to somewhat not redraw, but update Sonic.
Like 2.0 kind of thing.
Yeah. And that went over like a lead balloon. They were not only going to have people not going to the movie, they were going to have picketers out there.
They were that upset.
They were that upset about how Sonic was drawn. Huh. And so they go, we got a problem. We're going to have a $90 million bust here. Who can help us fix it? And that's when they said, you need to call Tyson Hesse. So he came in and he actually now not only was the lead in the animation of all the existing work, the first 10 minutes of the movie really didn't work because it didn't go into any of Sonic's backstory. And so Tyson wrote and created all the first 10 minutes of the movie, which takes place on the Sonic planet.
Nice. So you get the backstory, so you
Yeah,
understand.
right,
it kind of
right,
lays the groundwork for what
yeah,
the story's going to be about. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Huh. But it's all based on him just his obsessive love of drawing.
And now, I'll probably be living in his basement.
Right?
It'll be a nice
you don't have to
basement.
worry about that at all.
Right.
Well, it's so funny because, like, from like your generation to mine, it was, well, these kids playing video games in the basement all the time. And now for me, with my kids, I actually encourage them to actually play video games.
Right.
But it's because now what bothers me and drives me crazy is they watch other people play video games. I'm like, how is that any kind of productive use of your time watching somebody else do it?
But the prediction of the number one spectator sport in 2030 is going to be esports.
Yeah, I could totally believe that.
And when you go and you tell some of these universities that we deal with, because we're involved with education with USC and
the film
things
schools.
like that, and film schools, and you tell their university presidents that in the future there'll be more people watching your esports team than are in that stadium watching that football team, and they just can't
wrap their head around it.
Yeah, why would someone get excited about watching someone play a video game?
But
why would you be excited about watching someone play football? You're not playing it. You're in the stands.
And you see the money that's rolling in. I mean, the cash prizes and the fact that these guys can not only just make a living playing these video games.
Out west now, some universities actually have given scholarships to video gamers. University of Utah actually has given scholarships out, and there's some out in California. Yeah,
unbelievable.
Full scholarship playing video games for your university.
That is crazy. Well, let's go ahead and get started.
Okay.
This is the Extraordinary Podcast, and my guest today is Bert Hesse. How are you?
Good, man. Good to see you. It's been a while.
It's been a long time. So I've been really fortunate to have a lot of my old high school friends on the show. And so it's always like, it's been 20-something years since we've
So
seen
you've been
each other.
going out to the jails and you're interviewing them then?
The jails, the gas station parking lots,
right.
Where all the
homeless centers, all that stuff.
That's where my people are these days. No, we've actually been really blessed to have a lot of really successful people come through that we've been able to keep up with over the years. But in your case, we go back even further than any of that. So I think I can officially say that you are, for sure, without a doubt, the person I've known.
You can say it. I'm the oldest guy you've known.
Not the oldest. No. One of the ones besides my father that I've had the longest relationship with. How about that? There we go. But thank you for taking the time to meet with me today. And where are we?
We're on the Global Studios lot in Greenville, South Carolina. This is a facility that we're looking to develop into a full-service movie studio in Greenville, South Carolina.
Yeah, and in a huge, major, incredible complex.
Yeah, it's only
a lot going on.
300,000 square feet.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, the GPS sent me in the back way, so I'm like,
okay.
It took me 10 minutes to maneuver through the parking lot just to figure out the right spot to come to. But yeah, like I said, really appreciate you taking the time, because you are going to be one of my most fascinating guests to talk to, and I've got about 3 hours worth of content that I'm going to try to cram into as close to an hour as we can get. So I really hope that we can get into as much of this as I really want to, because there's so many fascinating things about you that I really want to talk about. People know you as a movie producer, but one of the things that I'm most fascinated with is your path to getting to being a movie producer and all the different things that you did leading up to that. Normally with my guests, I don't like to go through a chronology of their life and whatnot. But in your case, I think it's worth kind of talking about each aspect of your life, what you gained from that period in your life that then helped you where you are now. So you started off as a teacher, correct?
Yeah, I have a master's degree in education, taught for 5 years, loved the kids, didn't like the parents or the administration.
The pay probably wasn't real great either.
And so through a relationship in the church, there was a guy who had a ladder company out of Utah, and they were called Little Giant Ladders.
Oh, yeah.
And they were multi-purpose expanding ladders, right?
Yeah.
And I was so frustrated with education, wasn't going anywhere. I pitched him up for a job. He was in Utah, and they needed someone in Florida at the time to sell these ladders. And so had an old station wagon, had a very cheap used storage area where we store these ladders, because I would get the ladders from Utah and just in these big boxes and store them in this facility here. And we had, at the time, we had an old station wagon, no air conditioning. Now, this is in Tampa, Florida, in the summertime. And I'm driving around pulling painters and plumbers over and demonstrating this ladder on the side of the road. And I'm thinking, oh, you're going great, Bert. Here you are. You've got a master's degree in education. You're driving around an old station wagon with no education, harassing painters and plumbers on the side of a road to buy a ladder. You're really on the path to success here.
On the up and up.
On
right?
the up and up. But fortunately, I have a great wife who's always supported me in whatever I wanted to do. Never said, "Are you crazy?" Well, she says, "Are you crazy?"
I was going to say,
but
I'm
it's
sure
in a
she
loving
said
way,
that once or
you know.
twice.
And actually, the first year I made more money selling ladders than I did teaching, and the second year I tripled my income selling ladders.
Nice.
But then I never saw myself as a 40-year-old ladder salesman.
Right.
So at that time, this is just the start of the technology boom, and got involved.
Yeah, late 80s, early 90s when things were really just hitting the ground.
And started selling software. Didn't know anything about software or anything like that, or the data processing industry. Did that for probably around 8 months, and then started my own company called Software Services of Florida. It was more of a consulting contract, what's called contract programming. It's where these major corporations have dips in areas that they need to be filled with a temporary data processing person, maybe 6 months, 8 months, that type of thing. Almost like a Kelly, I hate to say Kelly girl, but you're supplying them with a specific skill, but for a specific period of time. And
almost like a staffing.
Right, but in IT.
Very specific to IT.
And then from that, established a company called Orbitron International. We had a private stock sale for Orbitron. Orbitron then acquired 100% of Software Services of Florida. We started Software Services of North Carolina, and we acquired a company called Engineering Support Services in Florida also, and that's the one that worked heavily in the development of the Epcot Center. That was more of an engineering consulting firm. Grew Orbitron to around 350 people. As I mentioned, we had a payroll of around $1 million a month. I had a board of directors and just sort of got tired of it and walked in and said, hey, I'm selling. So sold Orbitron to a company called Sykes, S-Y-K-E-S. They're a publicly traded company. Took around a year off, sat around, tried to figure out what I was going to do with my life. And then, as I mentioned, I can blame my wife for this one. She said healthcare. So we went out and bought a healthcare company called MedCorp. Well, it wasn't called, it was called something else, but we changed the name to MedCorp of America. Had several offices around North and South Carolina. Ran that for a couple of years.
And again, that was a similar concept where you were providing trained nurses and doctors for in-home care?
Right, for therapies, respiratory problems, whatever it might be. And they were all under the auspices of a physician's, prescription, that type of thing.
Right.
So I got tired of that. Just never felt that was, again, something that I really wanted to continue to do long term.
Didn't feel like it was your calling necessarily.
Yeah, it just didn't feel right. I always, when I felt that like selling ladders or software or healthcare was not what I was supposed to be doing, I would always just sit there and go, okay, if money was no object, if you could live anywhere you wanted to, what would you want to do? And so when I was selling ladders, I said, okay, I like living in Florida, but I don't like the physical aspect of chucking these ladders around. And
those little giants are not light.
No, they're not light, and they're aluminum. So every day I would come home with aluminum dust all over my hands and my clothes and everything. I said I really think I would enjoy getting dressed up to go to work with a coat and a tie and work in a professional environment, dealing with professional people. Now, that's not to say that the people we were selling ladders to weren't professional, but they were just in more of a blue collar and just great people. But I wanted to deal more with
You like that air conditioner. That's what it
right,
was.
and especially in Florida. So that's one of the reasons I got into the software sales part of it. And then when I got tired of that, the healthcare thing, again, was more of a blip. I don't even know why we got involved with that thing. We helped a lot of people, and it was good. And I sold that company to Columbia HCA. And then after that, again, I said, okay, wait a minute. Now that I'm at this age, what do you want to do? Well, I didn't really care that much about wearing a coat and a tie anymore. Matter of fact, I wanted to be more casual. And said, I've always liked creativity. When I went to junior college in St. Petersburg, Florida, I was going to major in advertising and arts and got involved with theater. And so I was really on the creative side, but never could figure out how to make any money at it. And then I said, well, I think I like the movie industry. And that's when I went home and said, hey, wife, I want to be in the movie industry. And she looked at me. And then she said, you are stupid.
that's what those you're crazies
that's
came
right.
out for sure.
And all these things, I mean, I didn't, this is I don't know if it's funny or not, but I'm still technology challenged. And I didn't know anything about technology. And I wound up running a 350-man women, company called Orbitron International that had nothing to do with technology. And back then everybody looked at you like, well, why is this guy the CEO of this company? He doesn't even know how to turn on a computer. And what I realized real quick is that wasn't my job.
Right.
My job wasn't to go out.
You weren't an engineer.
Yeah.
Right.
My job was to build something and have a vision to move it forward. And the same thing with healthcare. I know nothing about healthcare. I don't like getting stuck with needles. I don't like the whole healthcare necessarily environment. But that wasn't my job. My job was not to go to your house and change, a dressing on your wound or help you with PT or OT. My job was, again, to grow the company. And so when I got involved with the advertising agency, I'm not a graphic artist. I'm not an artist, drawer, that type of thing, but that wasn't my job. So I hooked up with a very, very creative person, and that was the deal. You're the creative guy, and I'm the sales and marketing guy, and let's work together on this.
Who was your partner?
His name was Tony Elwood, and we're still great friends, and he's in Charlotte, North Carolina, one of the most creative people I've ever met, and
he's the one that kind of pushed you down the road to to the movies.
Yeah,
right?
and if he ever hears this, love you, Tony. But
yeah, give a shout out for sure.
He actually, and he might not, because he comes across sort of rough a little, but
rough
he's
around the edges.
Yeah, but he is the most humble, lovable. He will give you the shirt off his back. That's what I just love about the guy. He had an opportunity when he was really young he made a very successful independent film called Killer. And people in Hollywood started taking notice of him. And he actually went out there. And I think he would have had an opportunity to become a very, very successful, big-time director in L.A., but just didn't like the environment, didn't like the way people were talking, didn't like,
I can appreciate that. For sure.
He's very independent. And so he basically walked away from what I think would have been a huge career as a film director in Hollywood, just because it wasn't something that he felt good about at the time. Yeah. So I got involved with Tony Elwood, and it was great. 10 years with it. Indie Vision was the name of the advertising agency. We did some great advertising. And that's when he approached
and you said
me.
you guys even had some Super Bowl commercials.
Yeah,
right? Yeah, that's
Super
pretty
Bowl
cool.
Commercials. It was really cool.
And so from there, he decided he was going to make another movie.
He wanted to make another movie,
and he wanted you to pay for it.
And he said, I want to make another movie. I said, well, that's good, Tony. Go out and make a movie. He goes, well, I need the money to make the movie. And so we went out and we raised, some good money, hundreds of thousands of dollars, almost $1 million to make a small movie called Cold Storage. And it was a great movie, and he was the director, and it was his vision. And he really educated me on the film industry. And then after around 10 years with Indie Vision, we were going to have to grow a lot bigger. And he really wanted to get more involved in some films he was interested in. So we just sort of, parted ways. And I said, we're still really great friends. He's actually done some of the creative work on some of our movies that we're going through now.
That's
so
awesome.
I still stay in touch with him. But
yeah,
Tony, you're the friggin' reason that I'm
it's
doing
all your
this.
fault.
It's all your fault, Tony.
That's great. I'm really interested about how you were able to, like you said, you went from ladders to software to healthcare to movies, like how you understood the business side and how you were able to have such a sharp learning curve.
And I know my wife cringes when I say this. I live under a lot of principles in my life, but the two main principles I live under, which drive her crazy, is I say, nobody knows anything. So just because the guy is wearing a white coat and walks into a room and says, hey, we need to cut off your right arm, it doesn't mean anything, And I'm not trying to be sarcastic about people or negative on them. And there are a lot of very smart, most of the people out there are a lot smarter than I am. I still think nobody knows anything in the real scope of things. I've got heart issues. And I've been told for the last 20 years, take this, do this is going to help, this is going to do this. And then a new study comes out. Oh, don't do that because that's going to be worse. Oh, don't do this, something. And you're just reinforcing my theory that nobody knows anything. So when I talk to people in IT, they're a lot more smarter in the IT than I was, but they really don't know anything. Same thing with healthcare. Same thing with the movie business. I don't get impressed by big time directors or big time actors because they just really,
yeah.
They don't
well, my
know
thing
anything.
is question everything.
Exactly.
Just because you know that to be the case for right here and now doesn't mean that's necessarily always the case. Doesn't mean that's going to be the case 10 years from now or later on. And it always fascinates me when you're trying to accomplish something.
Right.
And everybody says, well, it just can't be done that way.
Right.
Or, well, we just don't do it. It just doesn't work like that. Or what? Well,
Right.
that to me, that's what we'll question that. Like, what's
exactly. The second thing, Nathan, that I live by is we're all living in high school. We're just high school students with gray hair. And to me, it gets reinforced every day by when you read the news or you read these topics. They're still the cool kids. They're still the kids that are considered the geeks. They're still the kids that want to be cool, that are trying to hang around the cool kids. They're still the drama queens. They're still the cheerleaders. And they're 40, 50, 60 years, 70 years old. So it's all just high school with a bunch of people running around not knowing what they're doing.
That's a great perspective. Well, and it opens you up to a lot of possibility, right? Like it means like, so what?
So what? Yeah, right.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that perspective.
Right.
And that clearly has helped you have some success in the business world with that kind of a mentality for sure. Is there an art to putting together a deal? I have a few people in this industry that I'm friends with and I keep up with a little bit, and some are on the talent side and acting and all that kind of stuff, but some are on the executive production side and all the nuts and bolts behind it, and the money that it takes to get these things done and these films produced and all the post-production work to me is like mind-boggling. To me, like it's almost like filming the movie is the easy part.
Oh, yeah.
And then it's from there that – so how did you learn that? What was your experiences with that? How did you get good at that?
It was, again, through a relationship with Tony Elwood and doing a couple of movies with him. It was just learning. He had already made some very successful independent films, so he knew the business. So I was just sort of along for the ride learning, and I'm not shy at all letting people know. I don't know what you're doing here. Why don't you tell me that, type of thing. Because, some people I know either they don't want to be embarrassed. They don't want to come across like they don't know it.
They don't want to look stupid.
Right.
Kind of thing.
Don't look stupid. Yeah. Right. But, of course I'm saying, well, nobody knows anything anyway. So why don't you tell me what you don't know? So I learned it basically through doing, but as I've always heard and been told, there's two ways to get in the movie business: blood and money. Blood, you're related to somebody, and that's how you get in, or you buy your way in.
Right.
And since I'm not related to anybody in the film industry, it's pretty obvious how I got into it, through the money side.
You talked about Tony, and obviously, so he was somewhat of a mentor for you. Are there any other mentors that had a pretty big impact on you in your life growing up?
Mr. Lucas.
George Lucas.
No.
Oh, no. I just assumed.
My sixth grade teacher.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. He was Mr. Lucas. I was raised in St. Petersburg, Florida. There was my mother and my older sister, and my father at the time was a seaman, a tanker captain. He was the captain of these big oil tankers that would go out.
So he'd be gone a lot.
He'd be gone a lot, and 3-6 months at a time. So, I'm just at home around these two women. So I'm trying to figure out, my masculinity, my whatever. And I had a great mother and I still have a great sister. But I was sort of confused, I didn't know. Kids in that age, they're still confused, and I was even more confused. But my sixth grade teacher was named Mr. Lucas, and he, for some reason, took a liking to me, and he got me involved with sports, and that's where I sort of got my identity through sports, and started playing basketball. Got to play basketball in elementary school, and then got to do sports in junior high and high school and things like that. And that's where I got a lot of, I think maybe a lot of my competitiveness, but a lot of my teamwork and a lot of really understanding, unfortunately, some people have to lose. It's not that it just wasn't their day. And everybody can't get a trophy just for participating. That's not real life. There are winners and losers in these games, football, basketball, baseball. And so, Mr. Lucas was, and I still, when I'm asked that question, obviously my father had a great impact, but,
Sure.
But my father, and I think one of the reasons I got interested in the film industry, I've always watched movies and really liked movies, but I was never like a film aficionado that wanted to go to movies day in, day out.
Right.
But there's been a few movies that have really impacted my life. One was called Field of Dreams. I don't know if you remember that with
Absolutely.
Kevin Costner.
Sure.
And there's that relationship or non-relationship that he had with his father. Mm-hmm. And it was, if you build it, he will come. And the last part of the movie, which drives my kids crazy because every time I'm watching it, when the end comes, I always start crying. He says to his father, "Hey, you want to have a catch?" And so my father and I were sort of like that. He was a big war hero in World War II and the Korean War. I was a conscientious objector during the Vietnam War. Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, I had a ticket to go to Canada. My draft number was 4. Do you know how the draft was going back there in Vietnam? How the lottery system worked? I mean, it was a TV show. It was like Wheel of Fortune once a year. They would come on, and this was like 65, 6 through 71.
Wow.
And they would come on, and they would have this big bend with numbers rolling in it from 1 to 360. And then they would have this huge calendar, January, February through December. And so it would roll, and they would literally have like a Vanna White reach your hand into this barrel and pick out a number.
That part of the story.
And so January 1, your number is 150. And so, boom, they would stick 150 in January 1. And so everyone that was born in January 1, 1960, or 19, whatever your birthday was 150. That was your draft number.
Right.
And so they would go through this whole thing. Well, I was born April 2nd and in 1952. And so they were doing everyone in 1952 at that time. That was the draft year that they were doing
it.
So they were doing
and everything.
Yeah, they were doing. So it was 1970, but they were doing. If you were born in 1952, this is your numbers. So you get to my number, and now I'm out in California with a high school friend having fun surfing.
Nice.
And so we say, what's on TV? Oh, the draft's on TV. Well, let's watch that. So we're sitting there in this house, and I was having fun, let's say, and so they get to April 2nd and this lady reaches in the bin and says, number 4, and sticks it up there. And I got boom.
He sobered up
real quick.
Wait a minute.
Because I just saw my life go in front of me.
Seriously, that's what a scary thing.
Yeah, and at that time, but if you had a number 1 to maybe like 150, you're gone.
You're for sure going, yeah.
If 150 to maybe 250 or something like that, you're sort of in the middle. If you have some deferments or in college, you might be able to get out of it. And after 250, they're really not going to bother with you because the war is really starting to come to an end. And this is when a lot of people are in the streets. It's going crazy.
Yeah, really.
But if you're number 4,
you're
about ready to come back home in a bag,
right.
And so I had an airplane ticket to Canada and was ready to go when I got back to Tampa, St. Petersburg. So going back to the Field of Dreams, so my father and I, we never really clashed, but we were, he was a very military kind of guy. Then I had the long hair, the hippie, that type of thing. Yeah. But he had a big influence on my life too, because he gave me a lot of structure too. And the other movies that really impacted me were all family, good stories that, when I was growing up and now looking through this self-diagnosis because I'm laying on this couch and you're sitting there, with your notepad writing down these things. Now it's all coming out why I'm so screwed up,
You're regretting this interview already. I can tell.
Know. Can we cut here? I gotta. So I remember growing up again in Florida with my mother and my sister, and watching things like not Andy Mayberry. There was
Andy Griffin.
No, this was even before Andy Griffin. There was a show, Leave It to Beaver.
Oh yeah, sure.
Okay, and in Leave It to Beaver, it was back that time it was the typical.
Yeah,
mother,
1950s
father,
suburbia.
The house and the fence, and Dad came home every night at 5:00 with his briefcase and that type of thing.
Dinner was ready on the table.
Dinner was ready on the table, and I'm like, that's the kind of environment I want to be in. I want to be raised in. So where's my father? Well, he's on some friggin' ship in the middle of the Persian Gulf, But at that time, I didn't know that that's the way he earned a living for the family.
Right.
That's what he
knew. You don't relate those things.
Yeah, that's what he knew.
For sure.
And so I had some resentment because I'm watching these family-oriented shows thinking, okay, where's my father? Again, being in Florida, I think going back and then when the holidays came, I'm watching these White Christmas and all these other, and there's snow, and I'm sitting there with the air conditioner on in Tampa, St. Pete going, this is not right. That's
a miss here.
And so when I had the data processing company, we had offices in Florida. And we were doing some work in North Carolina too, because at that time there were a lot of commonality between the financial institutions in North Carolina and Florida.
That makes sense.
There was a guy named Hugh McCall with NCMB Bank at the time that was getting ready to, take over the banking industry throughout the entire United States. I mean, NCMB became something else, and then eventually Bank of America.
Bank of America, right.
So I would come up to North Carolina every now and then to call on, at that time, Bank of America, and at that time, First Union Bank. And every time I came up to Charlotte, it was like a Chamber of Commerce day. It was 60 degrees, low humidity, it was just beautiful.
Dream, yeah.
And I'm thinking like, man, this is heaven. So, again, I came home from one trip. I said, I think we ought to move to North Carolina. My wife's like, what? I go, yeah. She goes, why? I go, because the weather's really nice. And she goes, that's a reason to move.
Your whole family?
I'm tired of this heat and humidity.
Right.
So we moved to Charlotte, North Carolina. And the next year, Hurricane Hugo comes through and blows everything away. Yeah. And then the next year, there was a blizzard that shut down the city for like 2 weeks.
Yes.
And it's like, oh, this is great.
Your wife is probably like, what is wrong with you?
Yeah, good decision. Yeah, we get blown away by a hurricane and we get snowed on like we're in Bangor, Maine.
Oh, that's so funny. Well, I mean, having grown up in Charlotte and now with my folks down in Florida, I'm with you on getting out of that humidity and getting up to the Carolinas where it's so much nicer. But yeah,
hot.
Hurricane Hugo was a trip. That was
that was
a
crazy.
mind bender for sure.
Yeah. My wife has a great story about me spending the entire night in our closet because the sound was so loud, I couldn't sleep. And she goes, that's great. So you left your wife and 3 children out in the middle of the house while you're hovering, cowering in the closet with a pillow over your head. Yeah, but I couldn't sleep.
Well, what was really neat for us was we went out during the eye of that hurricane, and everything was like this weird.
Oh yeah,
green.
it's crazy.
It was such a weird experience. But so that's what ultimately got you to Charlotte.
The weather.
Was that? That's so great.
That's a good reason to move your family.
And well, for what it's worth, I think you made the right move because having grown up there, I'm sure your kids ultimately were grateful for that experience. So speaking of Charlotte and the movie industry, your original iteration of this studio, and correct me if I'm wrong, was kind of the thought was for it to be in Charlotte.
Right.
And you had a couple of different projects there that you had envisioned coming together. Do you want to tell me about those, the Catawba one and maybe the East Lake?
Yeah. No, I don't want to talk about my failures.
Well, I was going to ask you what your favorite failures were because that's one of my colleagues.
Wait, we only have an hour, right?
I figured this is a more fortuitous way to go into it.
So I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina, making movies, but thinking, okay, there's at that time, and again, it's just interesting watching businesses and cycles swing. At that time, if you didn't have bricks and mortar, you really weren't considered a legitimate person in the film industry.
Gotcha.
You were just like you were just like a independent producer going around the United States or world making movies. But if you had bricks and mortar, then you were a studio head. Right. And so, of course, in my mind, I'm a movie maggot, as my kids say. So I'm thinking, okay, so how do you get the bricks and mortar? Because the bricks and mortar also give you hopefully they give you a revenue stream that's consistent, whereas films, go up and down
because
heavily.
Of just constantly having a film in production,
right?
Kind of
right, and leasing out sound stages to other production companies, and
ancillary income.
Yeah, and now you're basically a landlord for other films to come in.
Okay.
So I hooked up with some really great partners that had been in that kind of soundstage management business, and I started a company called Studio South. And Studio South became what we are today is a entertainment asset management company, and we manage entertainment assets in two classifications. One are hard assets. Hard assets are sound stages and studio complexes like Global here.
Right.
The other is soft assets. Soft assets to us are films and movies, and we're actually developing a concept called the Carlton Media Fund, which will allow us to have monies to go out and do multiple movies at one time, as opposed to one-offs where you come across a movie, you try and raise the money for it. Now you actually have the funds together in a pool to go out and do multiple movies. So those are soft assets for us.
Right.
So our first venture was with the state of North Carolina, and in Charlotte, North Carolina, there's the area called the Eastland Mall. It was a deserted mall, and they were getting ready to tear it down. It was not on the best side of town, and this was going to be a huge economic impact for the state of North Carolina, which only had one studio complex, which still has in the Wilmington area, which is very successful.
Mm-hmm. I've got some friends out there.
Yeah, but nothing was going on the western part of the state. So Studio South spent over $1 million in architectural drawings, consultants, business models, financial plans, all this other stuff.
Putting the vision together.
Yeah, putting the vision together. But at that time, we could never get the city council members really excited about it. And over the years, I've tried to figure out, okay, why? What was it missing? And I think it was missing two things. One, it was big, and that scared them. And the best way for an elected official to not make a mistake is for them to not do anything. Yeah. And that way they can't, don't blame me. I didn't do anything.
Right.
Exactly. And that sort of, that goes up the channel. So that was the one thing. It was big. It was a 300 million plus development with sound stages, retail, shopping, educational.
Yeah, because it was more of a destination location.
Oh yeah, it was
just
big.
Sound studios.
Yeah, it was big. And the second thing is, I think they just wanted Santa Claus to show up. They just wanted it all.
That was the kind of the feel that I got from it.
Yeah, it was just, okay, Bert, this is a great idea. Now go out and do it, and
let us make all the money off of it.
And so it was like, this for any studio complex, like in Albuquerque where we were, or in Philadelphia or Louisiana or that type of thing, it really has to be a partnership with the state and the local entities, or it doesn't work. We're sitting here in Greenville, South Carolina, and Michelin, their North American headquarters is right down the street. Michelin didn't just show up in Greenville. They were wooed. This is what we're going to do for you.
BMW
this is why we want.
yeah.
Same thing with BMW. Mm-hmm. Same thing with Boeing on the coast of South Carolina, and the same thing with the film industry. Yes. Hollywood does not need Greenville or Charlotte, but does Greenville or Charlotte want the film industry? And Charlotte just didn't want it enough. And so after around, probably around a year, trying to make somebody love you, which never works, we just said, okay, guys, we've got to move on. We have other locations.
There's other places you can go to pursue that
right,
vision as
right.
well. In your opinion, is the toughest part of that realm just dealing with the government and dealing with the hassle that comes with it?
It's
so earlier this week, I had an interview with an actor, Alex Collins, and he's for the last 15 years he's been in Atlanta, and you've obviously seen the film industry explode in that area. And I was pressing him about that, knowing that I was going to be talking to you as well. And I was curious to get your take on what he was saying. So in Georgia, that's really why they've had the success. It's, according to him, is because of that relationship with government. And specifically, the biggest thing that made Atlanta different than Charlotte and even some spots in Mississippi, and I think there's another one up north they were talking about, is the law that they passed for the tax incentives. The only way for it to go away is for a new law to be made. Whereas opposed to a lot of other places like North Carolina and Mississippi, they put in some temporary tax incentives that were designed to go away after a year or two. In your mind, is that what's keeping the Carolinas from having that explosion of growth like what you've seen in Atlanta?
Exactly. Typically, this is a scenario that a production company evaluates on where they're going to make a movie. Okay, if you think from 0 to 100 here, okay, 0 to 50 or 50% of their decision is made on what is a state rebate.
And explain that just for those who don't know.
A state rebate can be anything from we're going to give you a check back. Well, I don't want to say dumb this down for the elected officials, but
you can dumb it down for me because
the concept
dumber than they are.
They think they're giving something away, and finally
with the tax incentives.
With the tax incentives, why do we want to give money away? Brad Pitt doesn't need any more money. Why are we giving this money away? And I said, think of it this way: if you open up the paper and there's a coupon for 20% off a shirt at a department store. And you say, 20% off. Now I think I might buy that shirt because I'm going to get 20% off. So you cut that coupon out, and you walk into that department store, and you say, listen, I've got a coupon here for 20% off this shirt. The shirt's $100, but I really don't want to buy the shirt. I would just rather cash in this 20% coupon. I'd like the money back. They're going to say, dude, are you crazy? You got to buy the shirt first, and then we'll discount the price of that by 20%. Now, there's two trains of thought. One is, the department stores, they're losing 20%. They're not selling it at the full price. That's one train of thought, and that's what a lot of elected officials, that's their mindset, But the other train of thought is, no, because that person would not buy that shirt unless they had the coupon. And so it's getting...
one in the hand or two in the bush.
Right, yeah. Would you rather have no money and sell maybe every shirt at 100% every now and then, or have more money selling shirts at 20% off?
Yeah. That's a great analogy. That's a great way to
that's the incentive. Now, state incentives, I don't want to bore your listeners because this is sort of dry stuff, but there's typically two types of state incentives. There's a cash incentive or there's a tax credit incentive.
Okay.
A cash incentive is basically you come to my state and you spend $1 million in my state.
Keep
I'm going to write you a check back, if it's 20% rebate, for $200,000. After we do the audit, after we make sure you spent the $1 million, after we make sure that everything is correct, then we're going to write you a check for $200,000. Now, again, some people would say, why are you doing that? You're giving them $200,000 out of the state coffers. Yes, but they spent $1 million in the state, and that's just on the production, because most economists will say there's a multiple of 8 typically. That means every dollar that a production company spends in your state, you can multiply it by 8. That's why Georgia claims a $9 billion economic impact on $800 million of incentives.
Because of that 8-to-1 ratio.
Right.
Gotcha.
And so, but that's a cash rebate. Cash rebate shows up in a state's budget. There's a line item.
Right.
And your state's going to have something that says film production incentive and then a number. And that's when all the darts get thrown at it.
Right.
Because everybody and their brother says, we shouldn't be spending this money on these Hollywood types. The other type of incentive, and that's what South Carolina has, they have a cash.
Okay.
And so, but Georgia doesn't have cash. Georgia has a tax credit. So a tax credit works a little differently. First of all, a transferable tax credit from a state does not show up in the budget because no one knows how much it's going to be used.
What it's going to be. Yeah,
right. And going back to that shirt analogy, it's at 20% coupon. And so with a transferable tax credit, you spend $1 million in the state. Now we're going to give you a piece of paper from that state for $200,000 that says this piece of paper is worth $200,000 of tax relief from the state. Now, as a production company, that is no value to you because you don't really have $200,000 of tax relief you need.
Right.
So what you do is you go out and you sell it to a corporation that has that state's tax issues. And you sell it at a discount. But that's how you, as a production company, monetize that piece of paper. And so the benefit to the corporation you sold to, now they have something that they can use to reduce their taxes.
Right.
You've got cash from the paper, and the state has made a multiple of 8 on the production spend. So going back to a production company says, okay, 50% of our decision is made on where's the money coming from? What's the state rebate? So 50% of any decision, that's a lot,
out of the gate.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, that's...
So then 30%, the next 30%, so now you're up to 80%, but the next 30% is where are the facilities? Where's the bricks and mortar that are going to help us make this movie? We can't make our movie on some field somewhere. We need state-of-the-art facilities that we can use for sound stages and post-production and things like that. South Carolina has none of those, right? And then the remaining 20%, that now you're up to the 100%, is the crew base. Where's the crew base? Right. Are they local? Because we don't want to be flying people in and housing them because per diem is going to eat up all the money that we're getting from the state back.
For just a camera guy.
So you got 50% where's the money, 30% where's the facility, 20% where are the people.
Interesting. And so that's why Atlanta has seen the success that they have.
They've got all three. But the problem Atlanta's having now is, yes, they have the money, but the 30% of the facilities is they're all booked up. So what good does it do a production company? I can get the money, but I can't have the facility, and then all the crew bases are being used. So it's
so that's where you feel like there's a pocket of opportunity.
Right.
And that's where you guys come in.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But so now the biggest hurdle for you then, I guess, would be getting those state legislatures on board and
right. Now we do.
Passed.
Last year, we have a bill called the South Carolina Motion Picture and Digital Media Incentive Act, and that has actually been written and I believe got into committee last year, but then didn't move out of committee onto the floor for a vote. So we're actually hoping this year that that bill will move out of committee onto the floor. I've actually had discussions with the governor, Henry McMaster, and the lieutenant governor, Pamela Evett, And both of them are very encouraged and supportive of the bill.
When will that come up for a vote?
Any time between January and April of next year.
And if that does pass,
if that does pass, then again, now we've solved the 50% decision,
the big chunk.
but we have the other 50% that South Carolina doesn't have, which are there's no facilities, except hopefully Global will be the facility,
right.
And the crew bases are very small, but we hope to draw some of those crew out of Atlanta up that might have been living in the Carolinas, but now have to go down to Atlanta for work.
Right. And there's certainly a window of opportunity there.
Yeah.
For sure. And quite frankly, that's something long-term that you can develop too, right? Like you could really, that's one of the best
Yeah, well,
things to
people
develop.
don't realize that Georgia's been in the film industry for over 20 years.
Right. I hadn't been down to the area where a lot of those studios are now, Tyler Perry's in particular, for quite a while, living out in the sticks and in the suburbia. I didn't get down there too much, but once I did get down there and took a look at what was going on, I was shocked. I could not believe how much had taken place in the last 10 years.
You know, I tell the elected officials, it has a greater impact on your state than landing an NFL franchise, an NBA franchise, or a Major League Baseball franchise.
Absolutely, without question.
And as we all know, and as we've all seen, a lot of these franchises move. Mm-hmm. You know, you might think, you know, yes, you built this huge stadium and they're going to be here for life. Yeah, well, talk to Oakland about that. Talk to some of the other.
Yeah, certainly the long-term impact of this industry would be much more sustainable from a long-term perspective, for sure. So that was the first half of my conversation with Bert. And to be honest, we just barely scratched the surface. In part 2, we discussed how he deals with high-level negotiations, movies he has in the works, and the future of the film industry. So be sure to listen to next week's episode, part 2 of my conversation with Bert Hesse. We'll see you next week. Hey, y'all. Thanks for listening. So what'd you think? What did I miss? Anything that you wanted to hear that I didn't cover? What do you want to know more about? Who would you like to see on the show? Hit us up on social media and tell me what you think. Check us out on iTunes and please leave a review. We're now on Patreon and your support there helps let us know we're headed in the right direction. We have a lot of exciting new things coming, fascinating guests, and some of the craziest stories you won't believe. So stay in the loop and check out more great content by subscribing at our website, 8keystogreat.com. Special thanks to my guests and all those of you living an extraordinary life. This is Nate G. We'll see you next week.